yesterday, Axios made all kinds of news here in the Dakotas because they're talking about the book The Breach by former Representative Denver Riggleman. Now, he is a Republican from Virginia, as I recall. Now, he claims that former President Trump's chief of staff received texts from 39 House members and 5 U.S. senators. And he cites certain text messages from GOP lawmakers to paint a picture of how invested many were in Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election. Now, that shouldn't probably surprise you. There were many people that were election deniers that believed that the election was stolen, that did all of this, right? But what jumps out at you is part of the people that were talked about in this book were Senator Kevin Cramer. And Attorney General Drew Wrigley, who's going to join us in 1 second. Now, the book reveals that Senator Kevin Cramer sent Meadows a forwarded note from North Dakota Attorney General Drew Wrigley, who shared his own idea for a last-ditch effort to demand statewide recounts of absentee and mail-in ballots in crucial states. Obviously, the timeline of that is what's going to matter in large part as well. So let's get to the Attorney General. Attorney General Wrigley, good to have you on News and Views again.
Hey, Joel. Sincerely appreciate the opportunity to come on the air with you and your listeners today, so thank you for that.
I want to talk to you about this reported in Axios. First off, did you do it?
Well, first, I appreciate that you refer to it as my own idea when it's a constitutional and federal law idea, and it wasn't an idea at all. As you can see from the reporting, as makes obvious, that I advocated for voting compliance in every state. And what the allegations were that some of the states, I don't remember the specific ones, I think it may have, but I do think it rings to me that it might have been Georgia and Arizona. There was some question of the signature evaluation, there's software for this, and that it has been altered for this election, that they had altered that for this election. And so the votes were not being assessed in those states under pre-existing law. And so and it shows this in the reporting and by Axios, I guess it is. You have to forgive me, I haven't read through all of that, but I don't need to because I know that I would never and did not advocate for anything other than compliance with state and federal law. And so what I was advocating to Kevin, and just so people know, I mean, Kevin and I have been very close personal friends for almost a quarter of a century, and we talk about pretty much every item in the news. We'll chat about it at some point. And what I was saying was, if what we should demand, and I think I'm quoted on this, right? What we should demand is, and I also pointed out that the Trump legal team had just made a farce of the whole thing. I mean, I would hope that people on both sides of this issue, whether they're for Donald Trump or against him, would recognize that there was some farcical lawyering going on there, and it just kind of made a clown show out of it, which is really too bad because there's a constitutional process to be followed. So what I advocated was, and I think they're quoting me on that, must be from a text message. I don't remember what that was. Must have been a text. What I advocated was that they demand a recount of all the votes that come in absentee, and I suppose military and others that come in with these signatures, and demand that they have a recount under pre-existing state law in those places. Like, follow your law. Don't make it up as you go along in an election. And that was in that quote, is that I was call for them to assess this election with pre-existing law. And then if they don't do that, if states refuse to follow their own laws, that's why the Constitution provides for a constitutional process for the state legislature in those respective states to settle the election dispute so the nation isn't bound up by this.
So let me ask you a couple questions with that. Okay.
Yeah,
so you're saying that the only advice you gave was to the White House to make sure that states follow constitutional law. That's not exactly riveting advice. I mean, that's out there anyway. I mean, what?
But it wasn't to the White House, Joel. I was talking to Kevin.
Which meant you were talking to the White House because Kevin Cramer's contacting you.
I was talking to Kevin and it got relayed. I mean, I don't presume. I mean, I'm sure I'm a pretty important person, but the White House wasn't asking me.
Okay.
I didn't have any contact into the White House.
So let me ask you this. When did that conversation with Kevin Cramer happen?
Good question. I don't know the exact date, but I do know that it predated January 6th, obviously. January 6th was the day that the electoral count was.
But what month then did it happen in?
It would have been, either in late November or December, because I remember there was a Saturday that Kevin and I were both in the federal building here in Bismarck. Our offices were on the same floor, and I walked around, and he and I were going through just talking about the whole thing, and that all these allegations had come out about all these states, and we were very aware that you had Republican legislatures in each of those hotly contested states, every one of them, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, and so the facts on the ground had been assessed under this constitutional structure that I had referenced earlier in my message to him. It had been assessed by Republican legislatures who found that there was nothing to these allegations, or not enough, that it would merit them following their constitutional right and federal authority to settle the election. And so we were sitting. The election was over. We both knew that.
Did the communication?
We both knew that it was.
Well, I mean, why would you give advice to Kevin Cramer that they need to go back and demand recounts when the campaign itself already was demanding recounts in these states where it's close? Now, that being said, did this communication with Senator Cramer happen by text or by email, or how did it go electronically? And if it went electronically, clearly, as this book claims, would you be willing to submit all records of email, of text to us in the media and to the public you serve?
If I had them, I would. Kevin and I can't remember that it was a text or whether it was him writing down a recollection of a conversation, which is more likely. I mean, I'm not an electronic person much. I definitely don't.
Well, your office just went through all of this. I mean, it did. You went through hell on the fact
I'm aware of that.
Okay, so my point is this: in this capacity that you were serving in, were you still, when you were communicating with Senator Cramer, were you still U.S. Attorney?
Oh yeah, and at that time, people need to keep in mind that the U.S. Attorney is the chief federal election official in every district, and they serve that capacity along with one assistant U.S. attorney who they are ordered to designate for every election. And you are available, and you have to make all the state officials and everybody aware that you are there as a resource for them on federal law. And we always provided that role. My conversation with Kevin, though, what's clear, I think it's clear that Kevin relayed our conversation to the chief of staff, who I don't know that person, but he conveyed it to that person in some electronic form. Maybe that was a text. I don't know.
Okay, so
that might have been an email.
Let me ask you this, because we've established you were a U.S. attorney. We've established that you contacted with Kevin. We've established that Kevin passed that on to Mark Meadows as advice of what the White House could or should do. The one thing in looking up with the Department of Justice, the rules that you had to live by U.S. attorney, 1-8.210 relating to congressional requests generally. Now, in this, through the Department of Justice, it says, except as extremely provided in this section, all congressional member and staff contacts with the department, employees, attorneys, offices, board divisions, and components, including in-person contacts and contacts by letter, email, telephone, or any other means, must be reported to the Office of Legislative Assistance or Liaison, right? And the components designated congressional liaison, if applicable, before any response. OLA will manage congressional correspondence, coordinating with the department, executive secretary, leadership offices, and components as appropriate. And OLA will review prior to all transmittal all departmental written communications to Congress, including letters, responses to questions for the record, briefing papers, talking points, slide presentations, and any other materials intended for submission or presentation on Capitol Hill. Likewise, OLA will manage the clearance process through which legislative proposals and views are considered by department components. I could go on here, but you get my point.
Yeah.
I've got to ask this question. You were working for Bill Barr. Bill Barr said there's no there. He was your boss. Did you go through this process before you communicated with Kevin Cramer?
No, and I'm glad you actually read through all that, because it becomes clear from that context that, there's a formal process, which I've always followed, and adhered to. I've testified in front of the Senate and House several times in my previous stint as United States Attorney. But it obviously, I think it's obvious to your listeners, it's obvious to everybody else, that it doesn't encompass conversations that everybody has. They run into their senators, their congressmen. Your sister and I had many conversations over the years on a host of topics. There's nothing about that. I didn't call up and say, hey, listen, I just ran into Heidi and she said never.
But
or Byron Dorgan or Kent before.
If you were giving legal advice to a U.S. senator, you were doing, you were saying, Mr. Attorney General.
That's not true, Joel.
Okay, Mr. Attorney General,
not what I was
doing. Would you say that correspondence with a member of Congress, with the United States Senator, needs to adhere to the rules that were expressed here?
If it's about lobbying the Congress to take action or not take action on something, that's what that encompasses. This wasn't any such thing. Kevin wasn't even in the United States Senate. Their election had just been settled. He'd been elected to the U.S. Senate, but he hadn't taken his seat yet. And Kevin and I were, as we always do, we're 25 years, we've been very close friends. We talk about all sorts of things. And don't forget the important, even look at the reporting.
I'm trying to go through the timeline. Kevin was in the United States Senate.
What I was saying was, I'm pointing out what the Constitution says, what federal law says. State legislatures have a role in this. And my complaint was that the Trump legal team, which was, by the way, not a Department of Justice team, it was an external legal team, that I thought that they were conducting themselves, I'll put it politely, poorly. And I think
that doesn't mean it's your job to fix it. I mean, my point is this. Kevin Cramer was in the United States Senate. I mean, he was in the United States Senate. Kevin Cramer was a United States Senator. You were communicating with him. These were the rules you were given. Your boss, Bill Barr, said, there's no there there. The election's over. The election was run. The election was fair. And so the states were being pressured to do recalls anyway. In fact, a number of them already were doing recalls, but it would depend on the date of your communication. Now, Mr. Attorney General, I've got to say this. Your office,
none of which I advocated.
Your office, the Attorney General's office, hasn't had a great record. In large part, I'm going to say this, not because of your fault. Somebody went in deleting, but there's a lot of people who believe that you could and still could focus harder on retaining and recovering those emails. Is there electronic coverage communication between you and Senator Cramer that you are willing to share with the public?
I'm not aware that there is any. And as I said, it would make more sense if this was a conversation that Kevin and I had and that he then texted his friend Mark Meadows. They had served together in Congress. I don't know the answer on that one or whether it exists, but I don't have any electronic anything between Kevin and me on this topic. Okay. And if I did, I would for sure, because they're quoting something. And by the way, you hear me. I'm not contesting the fact that I did illuminate or just articulate on the issue of, hey, don't forget the Constitution says this, federal law says this. But the other stuff you just said, I never advocated for recalls or any of this other stuff that was swirling around. And I would call on everybody to keep in mind, we've had at least, I think it's 2 presidential elections settled by this very process whereby a state legislature determines, hey, wait, there's a bunch of fraud here. We're going to settle this.
Do you believe the election was fairly won by Joe Biden?
I do. Yes, and I've said that since that time. Kevin and I talking weeks before January 6th, because people need to remember we have an electoral college in this country. They voted right in our view. Everybody watched it on TV. They voted. We did the math. Yes, he was lawfully elected by the electoral college as our Constitution sets out. There was a time period in there where it was contested very heavily, just as the 2000 election was contested very heavily. And then we have to be statespeople about this. It gets settled, and you move forward. And I can tell people who are listening today, too, they should be proud of their senator and congressman before that. Kevin never said anything contrary to that in our private conversations or anything else, just sitting around talking about the news.
Kevin Cramer went to stop the Steele rally, and he spoke. He went to stop the Steele rally. So let's not go there, Attorney General Wrigley. That one's going to be a hard sell with this talk show.
No, it was a heavily contested election. But once everything had
it was a stop the Steele rally. Agreed?
Yeah, because I think
the name of it was Stop the Steele.
I wasn't there.
No, I know you weren't there.
Wait,
what you're saying is I should
equivocating.
honor a United States senator that
that's what it was
spoke
called.
at a Stop the Steal rally because he never went. I mean, come on. That's a major stretch.
No, but Joel, you're forgetting just all the uncertainty, mayhem, misreporting, reporting, advocate. People are out there advocating for fair elections. I mean, Kevin speaks better for himself than I'll ever be able to speak for him, but I know this about him from my private conversations with him at that time, too. He never once advocated for anything other than compliance with state laws, federal law.
If the January 6th committee pulls you in front of it, will you testify?
If they do what?
If the January 6th committee subpoenas you, asks you to come testify, will you?
I can't even imagine why I wouldn't. To go up there and tell them that I think that we should follow all the laws of this country and the states and the federal constitution. Yeah, sure.
And will you make any of your records available to the committee? Any of them? The text messages, the emails.
If I had something like that, you bet I would. Why wouldn't I? I mean, nobody's even Joel, and I appreciate coming on your air. I really do, because no one's even alleging that I said something different from what I'm saying right now. People just wish, I guess, that you didn't contest elections or that you didn't say, hey, wait, we got a process here. It should be followed.
My point is not that. My point is, let's find out what was said. Drew Wrigley stayed with us, and I appreciate that. And I want to say this to all you folks who think that we're mortal enemies here. We can talk. We can have a conversation, and most importantly, he answers the phone. So I respect that. But Mr. Attorney General, in that role as U.S. Attorney, I cited the policy of DOJ. I cited the rules. I cited the fact that Bill Barr had said there's no there, and he was your boss. What I'm asking of you is this. Do you think it's right for a U.S. Attorney ever to involve himself in giving any sort of legal advice to anyone that is involving themselves with a political committee, which is exactly what Senator Kramer was doing? He was seeking advice on what to do in regards to this election. If a Democrat had done that, would you have given him advice? Should a U.S. attorney ever do something like that?
Well, I think, as you characterize that, it's a little different from two fellows who have been friends for 25 years talking about a matter of national concern. But however you want to characterize it, the Justice Department policies that you're talking about, they don't prohibit in any way, shape, or form the discussions between United States attorneys who are administration officials, and the Congress. It's specific to things like advocating for the Congress to go out and do something and pass this law or don't pass that law or do that on behalf of the administration. And by the way, it's administrative policy. So if Bill Barr was upset with me, I guess as a result of this, I could have that side discussion or something, because it's the administration thing. It's not the next administration or the previous. It's the administration you work for. How is that? So I think it's kind of a different discussion from this, frankly. But the point is, I don't quarrel at all with any characterization of me calling, and hoping for and urging that states all comply completely with their pre-existing rules, regulations, and voting provisions. And that if they don't do that, that the constitutional structure, it's not my idea. There's a constitutional and federal law structure that when states can't settle election, the legislature can do it. So, and then when that was assessed by all those state legislatures and they decided that there was nothing there, the election was over. I don't remember what date that was, but it became obvious. It was well in advance of January 6th, and I've never been an election denier. But I'll tell you, there's a great tradition in this country. It's why we have this time period between elections and when they are finalized, is that elections get contested, just like the 2000 election. Al Gore and the Democrats in this country spent millions of dollars. They pushed hard and they battled it out over the 2000 election, as well they should have. It was a very, very narrow victory for President Bush in one state, and they battled it out. And then it got settled, and everybody moved forward. It didn't make Al Gore and all the Democrats bad people for advocating for their side in that interim period. What it meant was they were battling under a constitutional and federal law structure, as well they should, and then it got settled.
But the difference is,
when it got settled on this one, it was over, and that's the way it was.
Al Gore accepted the results of the election,
for sure,
and Donald Trump didn't. Was Donald Trump wrong to not accept the results of this election?
Once the matter was resolved and all the things I just said, I won't repeat it. Your listeners heard me. Once all of that was resolved, I think anybody who didn't accept that the result had followed a constitutional course, whether it was the result they wanted or not, we've got to be statespeople about this. We got to look at that in our conversations and say, hey, look, this matter's settled. We move forward with a duly elected president of the United States. And I've for years, not just now, for years, I've commented that Al Gore was really a statesman in that situation, wasn't he?
So,
you're talking about hundreds of votes.
Let's go back to the Axios article.
Everybody's got to accept that.
Have you communicated with Senator Kramer since the Axios article in the last 24 hours?
Yes, I talked to him this morning. He was rushing to an airport, and neither of us could remember the exact conversation, but neither of us had reason. I mean, we both. I said, I made the comment. Sounds just like me. I mean, did
either of you know how that correspondence was communicated? You're saying you don't remember if it was a text, if it was an email, if it was verbal. What I'm asking you is, did you ask him that?
I did, and neither of us remember that there was how that was done. But as I'm saying to you, Joel, I'm not contesting that I said we should, make sure that they're following state laws. I'm not bickering with it at all.
I'm not trying to get to that, Drew. That isn't what I'm trying to get to. What I'm trying to get to is this committee has something that involves two high-profile people from North Dakota. It has something, and Riggleman made that perfectly clear. You're not denying it. We haven't had Kevin on to speak to it, but we're going to make that offer. Sure. I get it. I understand it. Sure. My point is this. You've got a situation in your office where there's lack of trust from people on both sides of the aisle in regards to communications from you, or not necessarily from you, but from a previous attorney general out there. Yeah. And so my point now is this seems to me to be your chance to say, look, here it is. Here's any and all correspondence I had with Senator Kramer. Here's the dates. Here's what I said. It's yours. And it's an opportunity for you to come forward and do what you weren't able to do with the transfer of power in your administration. And so that's why I'm asking the question. That's why I want to know how the correspondence took place. Yeah. I want to know what Kevin asked you when he asked you.
Yeah, and as I think I've said several times, that neither Kevin nor I remembers whether that was an email or how it got communicated, but both of us think it sounds just like me, that I said the law should be followed and we should urge that the law be followed. Now, onto this other issue, you keep going back to the emails again. My predecessor's email. I'm the one who made public the fact that my predecessor's emails had all been deleted.
I know that.
I know that. You're kind of saying that. Okay.
I
so
know
not
that.
Just trust. If anything, I've heard from a bunch of people who point out that they know they can trust us. We're open books around here.
We're gonna find out some things though because of the Axios article. We're gonna find out. It seems to me that they've got it already. The committee has it already. So if the committee has it already, then it would seem to me that you should be able to find it. Senator Kramer should be able to find it. If they've got it, they got it through you or through the senator somehow.
You presume that everybody keeps every text message on their phone? I think the opposite is true. I certainly don't. And you go through and you're messaging people, and pretty soon your phone is a mess, especially if it's a phone that everybody has like me. I mean, if they have it, what difference would it make it? Kevin and I also both. I wouldn't have any reason not to give it to you.
The biggest issue for me, number one, the big two issues for me, Attorney General Wrigley, are this. Number one, the DOJ policy, I believe, should have prevented you from giving any advice whatsoever to the United States Senator. That policy was clear. Your boss made it perfectly clear what his position was. The other thing that matters to me, and why I keep hounding this, is the fact that we don't know the dates. If this is the day after the election, it's a whole lot different to me than if this is December 24th or 26th. Do you see what I'm getting at? Because by then, All the fighting had happened. The recounting was happening. There was no reason to have that conversation because the states were doing exactly what you apparently recommended to the Senate, that senator that they recommend to do. Clearly, Kevin Cramer was working with Mark Meadows to find a way to overturn the election. Would you agree with that?
I would say that, yeah, there's a sliding scale in there. Like how insistent does someone want to be in the face of evidence? I agree with you on that, but I don't have any way to. My guess is this, and you just hinted at that. My guess is that there was some electronic conveyance from Kevin to the chief of staff in the White House, and that that's how they found out about this, or the chief of staff Meadows provided that email or text or whatever it was from Cramer, and it'll be there. That'll be a matter of record. I'm not. That's what I'm saying. I'm not contesting any of this. I mean, if there wouldn't be any reason, and they already. I think you're probably right. They have a copy of whatever it was that was passed along at the time, whether Kevin and Drew keep all their text messages or not. Anyway, I guess what I'm saying is we're not even arguing about this.
Okay, so
I'm sure I did advocate.
So
for following the law every time.
Do you think you did anything wrong?
No. Advocating that states follow their laws and that we follow a constitutional process for settling elections. No, I'm pretty consistent on that. And I think not only that, I would say people can count on that from me every single time, whether it's in my role. I'm always going to advocate that we follow existing laws. It's the only way elections are fair. It's the only way elections are respected. It's the only way we can, after the next national election, move forward afterward and people feel like, hey, guess what? Everybody complied with their respective state laws. And federal law was applied appropriately. The election settled.
Okay.
Some people think they're happy with the results. Some aren't. I'm going to advocate for that every time.
Is that how you want to end this conversation? Because the last word comes from you. Go.
No, I appreciate that. You asking me that question. And also, I genuinely, Joel, you mentioned earlier, we can have conversations. We do. It's meaningful. And you ask thorough questions. I've not felt short shrift from you in our conversations over time. And I appreciate that, genuinely. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for coming on. I appreciate it. There's tough text messages in here for both of us. I could sit and read 20, 30 of them, but I think it wouldn't get to the point of this conversation. I'll make sure they all get read as we can. So appreciate you coming on.
You bet. Take care.
Okay.